Hello, everyone, and welcome to the round 3 recap of Hart House Reading Week Open. So, after winning round 1 and a draw in round 2, rating wise, I was pretty much even because I got only 1.5 points against two lower rated players. And in round 3, I was facing a super talented Indian junior, Jaipreet Singh Dhaliwal. So just to give you a little bit of context about Jaipreet, he's a very interesting player in the sense that he's always going solo on time so early in the game. So he sometimes by move 20 gets to under a minute on the clock, but then he starts playing super well even though he's low on time. So jokingly, people call him the 1 second warrior because he makes so many moves just with 1 second on his clock, and he still gets them off without flagging, and he keeps playing good moves when he's in time pressure. So recently in a tournament in Toronto Open, I played Jaipreet and I played a perfect game of chess. It was even possibly a nominated game for Brilliancy Prize up to some point. I had like 50 minutes on the clock. He had 1 second. But of course, we have the 30-second increment. And then I rushed too much just to go for the glory. And I made a mistake, and he found all the best moves in time pressure, and he managed to hold a draw. So, given the fact that I drew that game from a completely winning position, and also the fact that I really needed to win this game to gain some rating. I was out for the blood this game. I really wanted to win this game. So Jaipreet has a pretty predictable opening repertoire. I knew he plays the Najdorf as black, and I knew that if I play Knight C3 Sicilian, he's gonna play D6. So previously, like the first game we played in Toronto Open, I played the Alapin against him. So this time I wanted something new. And also, usually in this position previously in my chess career, I played f4. We even had games analyzed on this channel where I went f4 and I won the game. But I knew he's probably going to prep something against f4, so I had some new line prepared for him here. I played the move d4. So it looks a little bit weird because after cd4, queen d4, knight c6, my queen is hit, and I have to move my queen away again. And if bishop b5, he's going to go bishop d7, and again, my queen is hit. But the idea is that I put the queen on d2, and then the setup I'm going to go for is to play b3, bishop b2, and then long castle. And believe it or not, this line is actually incredibly tricky for black if black doesn't know what they're doing. So Jaipreet plays g6, pretty normal move, and after b3 he plays the most natural move in the position, bishop to g7. But this is already an inaccuracy, because even though this is a line and it has been played by top players like Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and some other grandmasters in this position, it's not going to give black a comfortable position. The best that black needs to do here is to play bishop to h6. And this is the kind of move that if you don't know the theory that well, you're not going to play in a game. You're not going to play bishop h6 over the board. And the idea is that after f4, black is just going to simply develop pieces. And when white long castles, black is going to play e5, trying to exploit this pin on the diagonal. And of course, there's a lot of theory here. I don't really want to go into the details of that, but this is the best way for black to play against this setup. Jaipreet plays the normal move bishop g7. I play bishop b2, plays knight f6, long castle, and now short castle. And already here, black is in a tough spot because with bishop on b2 and all these three pawns and a knight around my king is pretty safe on the queen side. Like, it's very difficult for black to engineer an attack here. Like, b5 is definitely not going to work. I have two pieces guarding here. If he goes a6, b5, b4, it's going to be too slow. I can put a knight here. So it's usually not so easy for black to attack me on the queen side. Well, white's plan is pretty simple. I'm going to go f3, g4, h4, h5, and just try to checkmate him on the king side. So of course, I start with some prophylaxis moves. I go king to b1, consolidating the queen side even more. Plays queen to a5, and now I play knight g2. I remember here, he played queen e5, I was just queen a5, I was walking around the playing hall. I knew that after queen a5, the best move is knight g2. So when he played queen a5, I was standing and just made my move, wrote down, and just left the board again. So Jaipreet is already in a tough spot. He's out of prep, and he's already in a tough position. So I definitely won the opening battle. I was up to 1 hour and 34 minutes on the clock, and he started tanking. And in this position, he plays another normal move, bishop to d7. So his idea is that he wants to develop the bishop and bring the rooks here and maybe try to attack me on the queen side. But now my moves again are pretty simple. I go f3, consolidate my pawn on e4, and now next I'm going to go g4, h4, h5, and just try to attack. Jaipreet plays rook f c8, and now I play g4. And so far I have more than 1 hour and 30 minutes on the clock, and I have a very comfortable position on the board. So I was pretty happy with the outcome of this open. In this position, Jaipreet, after a long think, makes a pretty weird move. And once he made this move, I knew that this move is probably not correct. He plays the move h6. I understand h6 because he wanted to avoid g5, because after g5, this knight has to leave, and then h4, h5 might come, and that might be a little bit problematic. And if h5, I can always consider taking and even opening up the g file, as well as going g5. So the best was to actually play h5, allow this push, and still, even in this position, white is much better. Of course, f5 is coming. My attack is definitely much faster than black's ideas on the queen side. So practically speaking, this position is incredibly difficult for black to play. But after h6, h4, now again I'm going g5, and this time it's coming with a more devastating effect. And with g5, I'm attacking the knight and the pawn, and if he trades these pawns off, then the queen is going to come to h2, and bad things are going to happen to him. So again, after another long thing, he goes h5. And you can already see the clock. So I told you about Jaipreet's time management. He's already down 1 hour on the clock on move 13, and he has an incredibly difficult position on the board. So I was very, very happy with what I got out of the opening, and I was pretty confident at this point that if I play well, I'm going to win this game. So here I make my first slight inaccuracy. I actually played a little bit fast. I played g5. The best I could have done was to take on h5, and after knight h5, just go f4. The idea is that after rook g1, f5, with opening of the g file, black is going to be in some trouble on the king side. The reason I didn't take on h5 was that I kind of overestimated my position after g5. I knew that after g5, I'm going to go f4. I'm probably going to trade off the light squared bishops and then put the rook on f1 and go f5. So that was my idea. I thought g5 is pretty much crushing. So that's basically what happened. He played knight e8, I played f4, and now he plays bishop to g4. And at this moment, I started realizing that it's actually not so easy to accomplish f5. So initially, my idea was to play bishop to h3 to trade off the bishops, but the problem is he's going to take my knight. Now, if I take with a knight, he's going to go knight b4, and all of a sudden, the tables have turned. My pawn on c2 is hanging, and my pawn on a2 is hanging. And if I go knight c3, he's going to sack the rook and just crush me on the queen side. So I saw that this is not going to work. At the same time, if I take with a queen, it leads to a crazy line where he takes my knight on c3, I take the rook, takes back on c8. Now I go rook d5. I'm already like down a little bit of material, but I have this resource rook to d5, winning this bishop on c3. So if queen b4, then a3 wins the game. But he has this resource of b5, rook takes b5, knight d4, takes, knight e2, rook a7. And white basically gets rook and 2 pawns versus 2 knights. And with 3 pawns on the queen side, white is for the choice still in this endgame. But it's a very imbalanced endgame, and I would say it will be a 3-result game in a practical play. So in the game, I decided not to go for all these complications with bishop h3. I was like, let's just play something more calm. I go rook h2, guard the knight on e2, so that next move when I go bishop h3, and if he takes, I'm going to take back with a rook, and none of these problems is going to arise. But the thing is, it gives him time to play e6 now. He plays e6. Now after bishop h3, first of all, the bishop is not pinned, so he's not going to lose the rook on c8. And second, f5 is going to be much harder to achieve on this side of the board. So Jaipreet makes a couple of slight inaccuracies here. He takes the knight first on e2. What he should have done was to take the bishop, because the bishop on h3, as you can see for the rest of the game, is going to be super strong here, aiding the f5 break and also putting pressure on the e6 pawn. What he should have done was to just take the bishop and go with b5. And now complications will arise. Like I would say maybe I would have played something solid like rook f1 before knight a4 and try to achieve f5 next. Computer likes f5 right away, but it leads to insane positions. Black is going to go b4 and now putting pressure on this f5 pawn. So the best I have is to actually sack the knight and then get this position where I have 2 pawns for the piece and attack against the king. So I'm not sure I would have gone for it, probably in a game, because I'm not like 100% sure that in this position I'm going to have enough compensation for the piece, and it's actually scary to play this position as white. I would probably go for something like rook f1 with the idea of f5 and then putting the knight on a4. So anyways, Jaipreet took the knight on e2, I took back with a rook, and now here's a very interesting one. So he plays the very normal move knight to d4, attacking my rook on e2. There's this insane idea that he could have gone for with knight to b4. And the thing is, now all of a sudden he's threatening to take on c3 and then take on a2. And here, of course, probably in the game I would have played a3, but against a3 he has this nice idea of rook takes c3. So like, let me show you, like after a3, rook takes c3, a takes b4, which looked like to me that it's going to be easily winning. He has this idea of playing queen b5. Now after bishop c3, there's this rook on e2 hanging, which can lead to some problems. And if queen d3, queen takes b4, my dark squares are going to be a little bit weak. So like this is one variation. And if I go a4, then he has this insane idea of sacking the knight on c2 and then playing b5, which is still winning for white, but white's path to a winning position is actually pretty narrow. Like, I don't want to really cover all these insane variations, but he could have like really throw the kitchen sink by playing like this and making the position very difficult for me. But he played a more natural positional move knight to d4. I played rook e3, and now he plays b6, guarding the queen on a5. So in many of these lines, I was thinking about this idea of going knight d5, given the fact that this rook is pinned, and knight d5 attacks this queen on a5. I was always thinking about the ideas to trade the queens, putting pressure on this knight. So he was probably worried of them, and he decided to go b6 and guard the queen. So I played rook d3, knight goes back to c6, and here's the moment where I actually spent a lot of time. Here's the moment where I spent a lot of time, and I was trying to make this move f5 work in the game. So f5 looks like a pretty crushing move now because there's no protection to the king, and white gets a huge advantage on the king's side. But I was worried if this move knight b4. And here I started really calculating. I was like, what if I go rook f3, give up this knight, and then play king c1? Is this winning? So like, of course, I have two very strong bishops, and the queen is going to come to d4, and dark squares are just really weak for black. But then I saw this move queen a5, and I was like, well, knight a2 is coming now. Knight a2 is coming, and if I take the rook, he's going to take back. c2 is going to hang. If I go king b1, he's just going to repeat moves. So I actually saw this position in my calculations, and I wasn't sure about it. In fact, it's still winning after takes, and c4, which still looks a little bit scary with my king, maybe with b5 coming. Of course, I have more than enough attack here with the pawn on e6 already hanging, and the strong bishop on b2. But I didn't see this idea of taking and going c4 in this variation. The other thing I was trying to make it work was this idea to take on g6, sacking the rook on d3, and then taking on f7. So I saw this line as well. And the problem is I can't simply take the knight because my own knight on c3 is going to hang. So I'm already down a rook. But the thing is, after g6, king e7, I kind of didn't find anything in this position. But there's a winning move here as well, which is knight to d5 check, opening up the bishop on b2. And if they take, now queen g5 is coming, and with these two bishops controlling the entire board and the rook coming to f1, white is going to be completely winning in this position. But of course, it's very difficult to go for these sorts of lines if you're not 100% sure. Like, I think what I did in the game was a more practical decision. But of course, if I see everything on f5 and I'm 100% sure that it's going to work, I'm going to go for it. And also, I'm going to go for it if my position is not better. If my position is already not better, I'm going to sit there and calculate maybe for longer. But I was like, I have a very risk-free advantage in this position, so I'm not going to go for something crazy in this position with f5. So like one thing that happened with Jaipreet in the first round of this tournament was that he beat a very strong international master in round one. And the international master sacrificed a piece against him, but he just made one slight inaccuracy while Jaipreet was in huge time pressure, just like this game. And he actually took his chance and beat the international master. Like, this guy is very tricky. And he's able to find resources in time pressure. So I decided to play more solid. I played rook to g3. Now he repeats the moves with knight d4. Again, computer is really screaming for f5. And after e to f5, this time I go rook d3, attacking the knight on d4. Now if the knight goes back, now I have rook d5. So this time it's even much more stronger, and he doesn't have any counterplay this time. But again, I'm playing very solid. Queen to e3, hitting the knight on d4. And now here, he had one interesting idea that I saw in the game, but I thought there's no way it works, and I'm probably going to get enough protection to my king. One idea was to take on c2. Was a little bit worried of that he sacrifices things like that. Now he's down a rook, and he's getting some sort of attack going. But then after rook d3, queen takes king d2, white is completely holding the position, and there's no more annoying checks left for black. So this was one thing that could have happened in this position that I was a little bit worried about. But I was like, with the time situation, if we get to such complications, I'm probably going to be able to navigate those complications. And he's probably not going to be able to calculate all of that in 3 minutes. And if he goes knight b5, of course, we trade a lot of pieces, but after c4, I have such a great positional bind here. Like, knight on e8 is out of the game, f5 is coming. If rook takes c4, I always have bishop f1 to win material. So he plays queen c5. And again, engine is screaming f5, but I think my move rook d2 was pretty nice. Just consolidating, no more nonsense sacrifices on c2. Now, once he decides to go for it with b5, I was like, now it's the time. Now he has 40 seconds on the clock. Now it's the time that I want to really go for it, and I play f5. And my move rook d2 is actually kind of connected with my idea after f5. The thing is, now when he takes, I put my knight on d5. Now my pawn on c2 is guarded with a rook on d2. So he can't take with a queen, and if he takes with a knight, I'm going to trade the queens and win the knight on c2, and I'm going to be up a piece. So at the same time, I'm threatening knight to e7 to win the exchange. I'm also threatening the knight on d4 here. So he kind of has to go back knight c6. Now the pressure is off of my queen side. And now I simply take on f5. So the material is still equal, but first of all, his pawn structure is really bad. His pieces are pretty inactive here on the edge of the board. And look at all my pieces. This knight on d5 is a monster. The bishop on h3 is coming into life. And even though he trades queens and a pair of bishops, the position is beyond hopeless for black here in this position. So first of all, I'm threatening to take on g6 and just win the rook on c8. If he moves the rook away, I always have this option to sacrifice on e8 and then go knight f6, win the pawn on d6. I also have the option of just taking and going after these pawns. And with all of this weird piece coordination that he has, I don't think this is going to end well. So Jaipreet took on f5, I took with a bishop, and now he plays rook d8. And now there are many ways to win this game. For instance, there's g6 just blasting open this weak king on g8. And even though there are no queens on the board, with these rooks coming to the g file, that's going to be the end of the game. But I thought that the easiest way is just very simple. I take on e8, I sacrifice the exchange temporarily, but now I give the check on f6. The thing is, he has to go king f8. If he plays king g7 or king h8, I take, and after takes, then bishop d7 will win the knight. So he has to go here and take with a king, because if taking with a rook, then bishop d7. So he has to take with a king, but now after rook takes d6, first of all, I'm up a pawn, and second, the other pawns are also probably going to drop. So he plays knight to e5, and now I win the second pawn with rook d5, hitting the pawn on b5 and also the knight on e5. So if he wants to keep the knight on the board with knight f3, he's going to lose material after bishop e4, hitting the knight, and then rook e5 check coming. The rook on a8 is hanging. So he had to go knight to g6, and now I decided to simply take and take on b5, and now I'm up 2 clean pawns in a rook endgame with a much more active rook on the board. So here I was already 100% sure that I'm going to win this game. So he tries to activate his rook. I go rook b7, goes after the pawn on h4. You can already see that he's always under a minute on the clock, but I have a lot of time on the clock too. So I took the third pawn, and I won this pawn on g6 as well. But then he played key f7, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm actually losing the pawn on g5, and let's be a little bit careful. Let's pause for a moment and just make sure that I'm not choking this. Of course, I saw that there's no way to save this pawn, because after rook f6 check king g7, if I go rook f5, he's still going to go here. Of course, I can like keep the rook here, but after takes, his h pawn is actually faster than my a pawn. So I was like, with 3 passers on the outside, I can always like consider sacking the rook at the last moment if it's necessary. And the thing is, if he wants to win my rook with this h pawn, he has to bring his king all the way with his pawn to here, and then win my rook with his king on h1, and then all these pawns coming down the board. I was like, there's no way that this is gonna hold for him. But I spent a little bit of time around here, like just making sure, calculating some lines. I was like, okay, this is winning. So he tries rook e4, but now I just keep pushing the a pawn. So first of all, I saw that if rook goes to e6, I can simply check on f6. And after the trade, this time my a pawn is actually much faster than the h pawn. If I promote, it will control the h1 square as well. So I was sure that rook e6 is not going to work. So he had to take here. And now I just go a7, threatening to promote the pawn. He goes rook to e8, and now I play b4. So my idea is to go b5, b6, and just promote the pawns. So he played rook a8, I played rook a3, putting the rook behind the passed pawn. Now I played h3. Of course, I could go b5, b6, b5, h2, and then something like that. But I was like, okay, just no nonsense. Just take the pawn and cut off the king on the g file. And I have 2 extra pawns, and this is going to be a very, very routine win. So just like the first round, if you guys saw the first round, I get rook and 2 pawns versus rook. And this time it's a much simpler version too, because the king is miles away from these pawns. So the rest just plays itself. Just keep the king cut off and start pushing the pawns. c4, b5, I just brought my king. And in this last moment, Jaipreet tries this last bullet trick with rook f7, hoping that I go c6 and just forget that my rook is hanging. And it's funny that even if I go c6, this is still winning with 2 pawns on the 6th rank. But of course, I had a little smile. I took his rook, and in this position, he resigned the game. So pretty smooth win overall. I think I got a very nice position out of the opening and a huge time advantage on the clock. And that really helped me to get this smooth win. And I also want to mention that I knew that Jaipreet is going to go low on time. And I knew that I'm a kind of player that I'm inclined to making moves faster when my opponent is lower on time. So I was like, when he was down to like 5 minutes, I went out, I went to the washroom, I washed my face, and I was like, Kusha, please, Kusha, just don't rush. Even if he's down to 1 minute, take your time, stay composed, and don't try to play on his clock. You're doing a good job. Just try to keep playing the best moves. And I'm happy that I managed to do this time. And unlike the last game where I choked the win against him, this time I was able to convert without much issues. So with this win, I moved to 2.5 out of 3, and I actually joined the leaders of the tournament. So after this round, there were 4 leaders of the tournament, and I was facing a very difficult task in round 4 with the black pieces against the #1 seed of the tournament, Grandmaster Razvan Priyotu, which I lost to in the last Hart House tournament. So that's the game that I'm going to cover with the black pieces against the Grandmaster in the next recap. So stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let me know your comments about this game in the comment section down below. And hopefully see you guys soon with the next recap. Have a great one and see you soon. Goodbye.